Tonight's call show is an encore presentation, so please hold your calls.
Welcome to Conspiracies Against Wellness with your host, Janelle Elgaway.
Good evening. Welcome to Conspiracies Against Wellness. I'm your host, Janelle Elgaway. If you have a question for tonight's guest, please call in at 415-915-2291. And just a reminder, if you're calling in, please turn down the volume on your radio or computer. Otherwise, there will be some feedback. So I'm so excited for tonight's guest, who is Kate Nicholson. Kate is a civil rights attorney, advocate, and chronic pain patient. Welcome, Kate, to Con Nation. How are you this evening?
Thank you. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So, can you please tell me a little bit about just your professional background and who you are?
Sure. I worked as a civil rights attorney at the Department of Justice for 20 years, enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act, among other things. I drafted the regulations under the current regulations under the ADA, and did a lot of cases, some of them involving access to health care, particularly in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. That's sort of my professional background.
Okay.
I'm currently writing a book about pain, too, and sort of speaking about my experience.
Okay, well, we'll get into that later. What was it like working at the Department of Justice?
Oh, it was great. I mean, well, in my early part of my career, I was perfectly, as far as I knew, healthy. It was an exciting time because it was right after the Americans with Disabilities Act had been passed, which was a brand new kind of civil rights law covering disabilities from cancer to HIV, services for people who use wheelchairs, people who are deaf, and it was a sort of a brand new thing. So it was very exciting.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn from working at the Department of Justice? What sticks out?
What did I learn? I learned an awful lot about disability and people, sort of needing access and working hard to assert their rights and get through their lives. I learned a lot about how government and power structures work. Gosh, I don't know.
Well, that's enough, actually. But yeah, I was just kind of curious about that. So you also did TED Talks. What did you talk about during them?
I actually talked about pain in the context of the opioid epidemic. I started with my personal story. So basically, a few years into my career as an attorney at the Justice Department, I was working at my desk one day, just typing away, finishing a document that was due to court the next day, and my back started to burn. It felt like acid was eating my spine, and that pain intensified so much that my muscle seized and tossed me onto the floor out of my chair.
Oh my goodness.
And pretty much from that point forward, I couldn't really sit, stand, or walk again for the better part of 20 years. Turned out that I had a surgery shortly before that happened when a doctor severed nerve plexuses in my spine, and the symptoms occurred in a slightly delayed way when the damaged nerve started to grow back or grew into adhesions. Mm-hmm. I actually talked about working under those conditions and in particular that although my doctors tried all kinds of different treatments, from nerve blocks and ablations even to a repeat surgery, and all kinds of integrative treatments, the pain really didn't improve. And it wasn't until I was willing to try treatment with opioids, which was something I hadn't been initially willing to do, that my condition improved enough so that I could continue to work and function as a high-level federal prosecutor and negotiate settlement agreements and, argue important cases in federal court. I still had to lie in a folding lawn chair, and I couldn't, travel, but my mind worked. I got enough relief from the opioids that my mind worked. And so I told that story in the TED Talk and then went on to sort of examine what's gone on for people in pain and the social conditions, in the opioid epidemic, but even before the official epidemic began, and prosecution of doctors and the sort of pressures on pain patients and, the number of people who are affected by severe or intractable pain, which is 50 million as opposed to 2.5 million people who are abusing opioids. I just tried to sort of allay some of the, I think, misconceptions that are out there.
Mm-hmm. How long of a period were you really, really down that you couldn't do a whole lot? Well,
basically, I had about 6 months after the pain began where I could still function. And, I had to work from a futon at my office and, lie across the backseat of a car to get to work. But my mind was still working. And I was misdiagnosed initially, as many people with chronic pain are, as having ankylosing spondylitis because I had an MRI and bone scans that showed a lot of inflammation, and was treated for that condition. And because I think I didn't have that condition, I just kept getting worse and worse. And so I eventually sort of degenerated to the point where I was bedridden and really not sleeping and had to take a leave of absence from work. And that lasted probably 6 months before I did start receiving treatment with opioids and before they figured out exactly what was going on. And then I was able to work and function after that.
So because...
for the ensuing 15 years or so.
Wow. So because of pain medication, you were able to get back up, be productive, work again, and live, right?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. I mean, it was still very challenging. I still had physical limitations, but I was able to work and function. Yeah, right. I think they made the decisive difference in my life.
Well, I know a lot of our audience is chronic pain patients or intractable pain patients, and that's what all of us deal with because we all are all of that.
Yes.
And I guess I would like to know how did you mentally deal with this and be able to get yourself? I mean, was there a point that you thought, "Oh my goodness, my whole life is over with"?
Sure. Yeah, it was, for a little while I just thought I'd get better,
right.
Like most of us do. I was a young woman and thought I got hurt and I'd get better. And when it became obvious that wasn't the case, it was certainly very disappointing to me, in terms of, having to refocus my ambitions and, wanting to have children, things like that, things that I wanted to have in my life that didn't end up being possible. But I also had really good example because my clients were people with disabilities, and I had people with disabilities working around me. So people who had gone on with their lives, in spite of sort of illnesses and difficult circumstances. So, we do what we can to get by. And I was very fortunate to have this happen, as I think I told you. A lot of people with chronic pain don't get accommodations in their workplace. And this was very early, right after the ADA had been passed. I was very lucky to be working in the one place that was likely to accommodate me.
Mm-hmm. When you were at that lowest point, when you weren't sure how you were going to be able to come back and stuff like that, what kind of was driving you inside? Was it something that it was just naturally like a almost a survival mode kind of thing kicked in, or how did you actually do that?
Honestly, a lot of it I think is I was just doing what I could do to make myself happy, is the truth. I mean, a lot of it's brain chemistry. I don't think I had a huge predisposition for depression, but I also think, I had a lot of friends around me. I had really good support, family support, and partner support, and I think it really has to do with, I think we all do what we can in life to be productive, to feel good. And ultimately, moving forward was even though I had lost certain things, moving forward was the best way to do that.
So once you came back, is that when you started to advocate more and kind of start speaking out on the issues that are going on within?
Actually, when I was working as a government attorney, I was really just pretty focused on my life and work. I'd done a little bit of writing and advocating, but I didn't really begin actively advocating until a couple years ago, when the environment just became, completely untenable for people. At that point, I felt like I had no choice but to speak out, partly because I was doing much better and off of pain medicine, and I felt like, I was sort of lucky that it happened, that my condition happened at a time when doctors were willing to prescribe, opioid medication to the extent necessary to restore function. And there weren't, even though there were some pressures, there weren't these considerable pressures that we see today.
So
I think I mentioned to you, I also had an experience myself. So I moved from Washington, D.C. when I left the Department of Justice to Colorado. And because at that point, I was just getting off of pain medicine. And I moved to Boulder, Colorado. And because I had, was changing, living, far across the country, and didn't have medical referrals from, my physicians in Washington to physicians that they knew here, I found that I had a really hard time getting a doctor who would treat me. And the reason that happened is because in this community there had been a fairly recent incident with a well-respected pain doctor who had been put out of practice because of a DEA agent who posed as a pain patient. And that really had a chilling effect on anyone being willing to take on new patients who were on opioids. And I was actually going off. I just wanted help tapering. But I ended up having to fly back to Washington, D.C. and see my physician for a couple months, which, was kind of remarkable to me. So I think the discrimination actually hit home as well. And that spurred my advocacy.
I want to I want to get into a little bit of the legal side of things. So what is the current legal environment going on right now with concerning opioids, patients, doctors? What is that right now?
Well, there are a lot of things happening. We started to see, even in sort of the middle of the 2000s, doctors starting to be prosecuted. DA actions were becoming more frequent. There were certainly bad actors and pill mills that needed to be busted, and were. But we also saw, at least I did in reading the case law, physicians who seemed to be, decent doctors also being investigated. So that started happening, I guess, in the mid-2000s. But things didn't really dramatically change, I think, until 2016 when the CDC issued its guidance for primary care physicians. Because at that point, although a lot of the recommendations were really trying to address the fact that pain is not taught much in medical school, nor do doctors receive a lot of training about addiction in general medical education. It's only those who go on to specialize sort of in anesthesia or pain management who really receive more training about treating pain. I think, the intention theoretically of the CDC guidance was to sort of provide practice protocols for primary care physicians who hadn't received that training. And, a lot of the things that they said about prescribing at the lowest possible dose for the shortest period of time and urging caution makes sense. The problem came in a couple of recommendations where they actually assigned numbers. There were really two kinds of recommendations. One of them was the recommendation for how long opioids should be prescribed for acute pain. There was an understanding that is also true that most of the problem with people misusing prescription opioids had to do with what we call diversion. People using prescribed, medication that was not prescribed for them. They got them from leftover supplies in medicine cabinets, or borrowed from family and friends, or bought on the street. And so in order to sort of avert the problem where doctors would prescribe 30, 60 days for an acute condition, a broken leg, a minor surgery, and then medicine was left in medicine cabinets where it could be taken by other people for misuse, the CDC decided to issue guidance about acute prescribing. And they said that in general, you don't want to prescribe, that a lot of conditions won't require more than 3 days of medication, and that acute conditions will rarely require more than 7 days. Mm-hmm. They did name those numbers. They didn't say that you couldn't prescribe more than that. It was simply a recommendation. The other set of recommendations that have gotten a lot of attention are the recommendations about dosages. So in that situation, the CDC divided the universe into two worlds. And the two worlds were people who were going to be started on opioids, who had never taken them before. They were put in a different category from people who are currently taking opioids. And they said for people who are starting taking opioids, that doctors should be cautious in prescribing more than 50 MME, morphine equivalent milligrams, and that if they were prescribing more than 90, they needed to justify it. They needed to explain why the patient's condition required it. They didn't say you couldn't do it. They just said exercise caution, explain why you're doing it. And then with respect to current patients, people who have already been taking opioids, all they said was you really just need to do a cost-benefit analysis. Make sure that people are getting benefits rather than, a danger of harm over time. So they just said evaluate your current patients.
So if
the problem is that...
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go.
No, I was just going to say the problem is that those requirements, those numbers that they assigned, even though they were flexible in the way that the CDC worded them, they have been given the force of law in half of the states. Half of the state legislatures have enacted laws saying you can only prescribe for 3 to 7 days. Now, a lot of them do have exceptions for chronic pain, but there can be additional burdens there too, because sometimes insurance companies can use the law as a reason to deny coverage, and pharmaceutical chains. That policy was sort of adopted by CMS, which now will only allow 7 days for acute pain, and a lot of state medical licensing boards and the Veterans Administration and CMS have also sort of used those dosage limits without making, without saying, new patients versus current patients. Mm-hmm. They've set sort of maximum sort of dosage requirements. And that's really what's, having such a deleterious effect on people right now, because a lot of doctors feel like they have to taper people down to those levels. And it's causing a lot of problems for people in pain.
Right. I know a lot of patients are confused about this too, and maybe you can clear this up. So starting in 2019 for Medicare and Medicaid, CMS is saying at first it was going to be 90 MMEs, and then they put it to 200 MMEs. Right. But now I'm hearing that that's not going to actually happen. Can you clear up of what is going to happen then?
Well, I haven't heard that it's not going to actually happen. I mean, okay. They issued a rule. And as far as I know, they issued a rule on April 2nd. Mm-hmm. As far as I know, they haven't issued another rule. And in that rule, basically, they had put a rule out for notice and comment. And they had considered in the notice and comment rulemaking that they might have an edit, which means only that they would allow sponsors or insurers to deny coverage for people over 90 MME. They got a lot of backlash mm-hmm. against that requirement, including from people who wrote the CDC guidelines, who said, hey, wait a minute, that is not what we intended at all. We never said you should stop, you should not allow anyone to go over 90 MME. And so what they did is, instead of creating a hard edit at 90, they created what they call a soft safety check, which is done in a lot of states anyway. The pharmacist just has to call the doctor and confer. Mm-hmm. They did, though, at least in their rule, allow insurers to do a hard edit at 200 MME. That doesn't mean that insurance won't cover it, and that doesn't mean that there's no appeal process to CMS, but it does create significant additional burdens.
Okay. So if these are, if CDC did not mean for this to be that, they can't prescribe over 90 MMEs and stuff like that, so why are doctors all over the country not pulling their patients down, force tapering them, or just completely taking them off? Why is the DEA raiding doctors' offices when there's not really any charges and they just get dropped? But, why is this going on?
I think it's kind of like a brush fire, or an acorn that's made a mighty tree. The CDC sort of issued these guidelines with built-in flexibility that they had to justify with studies. And what's happened is these numbers have sort of been abstracted by legislatures and by the DEA, who are in, all, sort of caught up, I think, in some sense, in an environment of hysteria driven by the media and overdose deaths, to try and stop that, and there hasn't been the thoughtful consideration given. I think, doctors do often misunderstand some of the requirements, and I think they're sometimes tapering where they're not required to, partly because they don't understand it, or they fear DEA prosecution or oversight, or they're tired of being blamed for the opioid epidemic. There are all kinds of reasons.
Well, it's been like a domino effect.
They might be risk averse and choose not to treat in that situation. Right. It's a difficult thing. Now, the DEA is, unfortunately, and CMS both are also using physician drug monitoring programs, which exist in every state. Every time you fill a prescription, it's logged in so that there's an official file of what's been prescribed, and they're using those things and looking at the numbers that doctors are prescribing in a way that was really never intended. And if doctors are prescribing high doses for a lot of patients, instead of stepping back and considering, are they doing that because they see only the sickest patients? Mm-hmm. That's kind of a red flag for them, and they're starting to investigate. Okay. So it's created a very problematic environment for physicians.
Yeah.
Unquestionably.
So why are people, because I want to change this to the patients and doctors, why are patients, if they've been done wrong, hurt, or possibly even have died, why are they having such a hard time getting the correct legal help, or any legal help at all?
It's hard to. First of all, there aren't really lawyers. It's part of it's a big flaw with the legal system. There aren't really lawyers for ordinary people. There are lawyers for corporation. There are lawyers who work for the government. There are some public interest organizations, and there is a small subset of lawyers who work in what we call legal services for indigent people. But generally, they're trained in sort of housing discrimination in certain categories, employment, certain categories. So it's very hard for anyone even if someone stole something from me and I wanted to go to court, being able to afford a lawyer, even, for something like that would be almost impossible. So it's not easy to get legal assistance in ordinary situations. Medical malpractice, people who have medical malpractice are able to get attorneys on these contingency fee agreements, the idea of sort of a later payout. But, it's problematic. And I think, it's also challenging when you have, for example, the office I worked for in the past of the Justice Department was charged with helping people with disabilities, and so that's their mandate. But right now, they're under an administration with Jeff Sessions that is very focused on sort of the opioid war and less sympathetic. Although I still think people should have filed Title III complaints with the Department of Justice, and if they've been discriminated in their job, with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And I think people who have been discriminated against should consider even anonymously approaching, or if they're willing, actively approaching medical boards, because if you've been fully abandoned as a patient, that's actually illegal. Mm-hmm. So there are legal avenues, but they're limited.
Right.
They're limited.
We have a few calls coming in. Do you mind if we take a few calls?
Not at all.
Okay. Caller from area code 262. What's your name and where are you from?
Hi, this is Dave. I'm in Wisconsin.
Hi, Dave.
And hi, everybody. Hi, Kate. I'm so sorry to hear about the terrible circumstance regarding the beginning of your disability, and to hear you working on a futon makes me just crumple to the floor with admiration. And I could never do that. I'm housebound. I have canal stenosis and foraminal stenosis. I got about 56 nerves being pinched, and I was cut off in September 17.
Yeah.
I'll get to the thanks. I'll get to the meat of what I wanted to say. Oh, the CDC explanation was just amazing. I read it and had trouble comprehending things, even though I'm used to reading technical documents. I actually became a surgical technician, so it was not strange reading. But to hear you spelled it out so magnificently. I have already come out and said to get the quickest relief, we'd have to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, the suicides need to stop. The brush fire needs to stop. And you just talked about patients' access to legal redress. Is this going to have to go to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, well, I think at least we have to get it into the courts to begin with, and that's a challenge too. But I also think the biggest thing is really, at least I'm working more actively, even though I am a lawyer, at trying to change the narrative, trying to speak, trying to write, trying to talk to people in power and say, hey, the story you're hearing is not the only side of the story. So I think we have to work on multiple fronts, but unfortunately, I think we also have to get it into the court system to begin with. You know,
Dr. Klein said we should start locally, and I've talked to Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, is our congressman in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, and
well, Dave,
thanks.
Thank you so much for calling in, Dave. I appreciate it.
Sure. I'm so sorry to hear that you were cut off. That's unacceptable and inhumane.
We're going to take another call. Caller from area code 209. What's your name and where are you from?
Hi, this is Arianna, and I'm from California.
Hi, Arianna. What's your question?
One of the questions I have, Kate, I appreciate your videos. I've watched them, and your advocacy, first of all. The aspect of legal pursuit for patients in pain is pretty limited. When I contacted the ACLU in San Francisco in 2014, basically they said there's no rights being violated along the lines of the drug testing and discriminatory actions that are being taken against pain patients. And really it was based on the fact that drug testing wasn't law, is what I was told. And that in a free country, in America, a person is free to go anywhere they want. So if you don't like to be subjected to drug testing, you can go somewhere else. But that being said, now that drug testing and contracts for medication are the standard of care all across the nation, that freedom as a citizen is no longer there. And it does fall under medical tort law as far as the standard of care. And in my discussion with Dr. Fuden a few weeks back, he said basically doctors won't deviate from the standard of care due to liability issues, legal liability issues. So basically it's a big hamster wheel from my perspective as far as trying to address this from a legal perspective, because there's no avenues of legal pursuit.
Well, first of all, so it depends, I guess, on what the legal question is. I mean, there are organizations like DREDF, the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, Disability Rights Advocates, and some groups in California that might be more willing to take on certain kinds of actions, like a denial of treatment. But with respect to drug testing, I think it is a lot harder, because basically you, by becoming a patient, if that's the standard of care and, you want treatment, there's really not much of a way around it. If you want to get treatment.
But
now, you can get medical treatment, which isn't...
Right, but the standard of care regarding opioids has been based on primarily, and those guidelines set forth by the CDC were basically formed under the assumption that this is all about prescribed medication, when in reality, we're talking about addiction. The opioid crisis is a farce in that it's not about opioids. This is about addiction. And we're going about fighting a problem that has to do with a really complex psychosocial, biological issue by trying to reduce the supply of a substance when it's not about the substance per se.
No,
so,
I completely agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree that it's a far more complex thing and that access to a substance is only one aspect of addiction.
But that being said,
you were asking specifically about the universal precaution of drug testing. So,
well, the drug testing. Well, as far as the legal aspect about drug testing, in my opinion, it's based on profiling people, because if there's no probable cause, really, you have a doctor that says, I think this patient might be abusing drugs because they've gotten 5 prescriptions in the last month. I could see a situation or a criminal activity that happens that they're convicted of, and then they have to be monitored. But we're talking about some minority report kind of, approach where we're trying to prevent crime from happening before it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sort of depends. When you were talking about the opioid epidemic, generally in pill limits, I think people who are abandoned and denied care, there are causes of action. If you're talking about, it sort of depends. If you're talking about drug testing, it really depends on how it's being used. I mean, a lot of the standards of care say you do it once a year. If it's being done in a profiling way, racially or, disproportionately, then there might be a cause of action. It just really depends on the circumstance.
Patient abandonment, I worked in the medical field for about 10 years, and patient abandonment is easily avoided. And all the doctor really has to do is decide they're not going to see a patient for whatever reason, and then give that patient a list of doctors who can see them in the area. And
with a 30-day notice.
What's ending up happening is patients are being basically let go legally and given a list or given a referral and cast adrift. And there is no legal liability that falls upon the doctor at that point because they've covered their bases.
It depends on a couple things. I mean, that's based on state law. And different states are different. And, most states do have, if it's technical abandonment, a 30-day notice window and a list of doctors. But, if you're abandoned in an emergency situation, common law can come in, like if you're in the middle of forced withdrawal, there could be liability. But more importantly, under things like the ADA, if you're really denied treatment on the basis of your disability, then that's a different kind of cause of action than the state law cause of action.
Well, I kind of find it
difficulty. Go ahead.
Well, I just find it frustrating. All of it. I mean, we've talked online through Twitter a couple times in conversation. I've been fighting this whole issue since 2013. And instead of being force tapered right now, I decided I wasn't going to play the game that they had set up. And what I saw.
Is that what you mean?
Correct. But that being said, over the last 4 years, I've had 5 surgeries, and acute and post-surgical protocols for pain control have been affected. And I was undertreated for pain during 3 of the surgeries over the last 4 years. And one was a major abdominal surgery where I had a hysterectomy. And what's happening due to the hysteria around the opioid issue, no matter how much advocacy we're doing, we're not being taken seriously and we're not being heard. And the problem with protesting and trying to get your voice out there is that a lot of people, like myself, like others, are too sick to be going to Washington, D.C., or even going to my state capital would be an 8-hour drive for me. And with my cervical spine injury, that would be too much of a hardship. So
Absolutely.
the advocacy that we can, the advocacy, avenues that we have as pain patients are very, very limited. And then what's ending up happening is we're relegated to our living room and we're in an echo chamber and we're not being listened to. I've written letters, I've signed petitions till the cows come home, and it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do anymore.
I think all of the forces are at this point working against us. I think the pendulum has shifted, and in the 90s, pain treatment was a priority, and it's been blamed for the opioid crisis, and now all the forces are working in the other direction. I mean, that's part of the reason.
How do we change that narrative?
I think, we just do. I mean, that's part of the reason that I'm writing a book and doing a TED Talks and stop doing my regular job to do this pro bono for a while, because I think I might be in a position to be heard by some people, and because my health, although I still have pain, certainly, I am not in the condition that I was before, where there's no way I would have been able to travel. So I definitely hear you about the difficulty. I think, unfortunately, probably things have to get bad until they get better, until it starts affecting more people. And I do think the acute pain limits are going to start affecting people. I mean, those have only been in place in states for, a year or so in some, and not even 6 months in others. But, people who are having major surgeries and can't get more than 7 days worth of pain medicine are going to start objecting. Hospital supplies are starting to run short. Cancer patients are starting to be affected, but it's unfortunately going to take things getting worse before they get better. I wish I could, wave a wand or be ultimately effective. But I think you're right. I think we're in a very difficult environment. Very difficult.
Arian, thank you so much for calling in. I apologize. We have a few more callers here, and I have to keep going. Caller from area code 224. What's your name and where are you from?
Hi, my name is Kathleen, and I'm calling from Arlington Heights, Illinois.
Hi, Kathleen. What's your question?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I was curious. You had mentioned that you were in a position now to be heard. If I'm wondering if, in fact, we can start a class action suit as United States citizens as far as the treatment of chronic pain patients, which I feel is torturous at this time, and maybe families of suicide victims because of the treatment that they've received. I don't know if it's I'll give an example just really quick. I was just in the hospital. I had a procedure for my bladder on a Friday, and there were complications. I was admitted to the hospital, and my pain management doctor was not on duty. It was his partner. And basically, he was upset that I was admitted, and so he gave me half of my dose of ketamine. It was witnessed by 2 nurses when he came in the room, and I said, why would you put me on my tapering dose for the 2 days when that, you've given it to me before and you know what I need when I'm in this much pain? And he said, you should know better as a chronic pain patient of 27 years not to have a procedure on Friday. It was an emergent procedure that I had, but that was basically my punishment. And this has happened to me over 27 years, more times than I can count in different situations.
I'm so sorry.
I even have a recording of a nurse who told me in an emergency room in a very loud voice prior to catheterizing me, my doctor had prescribed a bolus of ketamine. She walked in, slapped the leads on me, and said, you finally got what you wanted. You got your horse tranquilizer.
I'm so sorry.
What can we do about this kind of treatment?
I mean, I think that's outrageous that what happened to you, and I'm very, very sorry to hear it. Lawsuits and creating lawsuits are complicated. They have to be in certain states with jurisdiction and all kinds of things. But I'm hoping, I'm sort of working with a couple of other lawyers and doctors looking at cases to see, what we can do. I am currently, just so you know, not practicing at the moment because I am writing a book and talking, and can't physically do all of those things at the same time. But I have talked to certain lawyers who are in a position to take cases, and we're sort of trying to come up with the best theories for people that we can. So it's certainly in discussions, and I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility. And as I did say, I think it is a good idea to file complaints with the Department of Justice so that they know what's going on, and because they're required to investigate. I think that's one avenue that people can pursue right now. But
Kathy, do you have anything else?
And I'm curious if we're better off, though, approaching this as a class action suit, as a group of people, rather than we seem to be getting nowhere on our own. And I hear frustration in other callers.
For a class action, for a class, but that's part of the issue is sort of for a class to be grouped, you have to all be sort of in the same jurisdiction and location and have similar conditions, and so I agree that eventually a class action is a good way to do it. The nice thing about what the Department of Justice does, and again, I caution because it is under sessions right now, is they aren't required to do a class action in order to get relief for a broad group of people. It's sort of a separate thing. But yes, I mean, I think class cases are a good idea. They're complicated to put together, but yeah, I think that's a good tool.
Kathy, did you have any other questions?
No, that's all. I thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for calling in. And I we do have two more callers, but I just wanted to, I have a question that I wanted to kind of go off of with that. So is there a way that we can, all right, say if I'm disabled under the Social Security disability, and I read that people cannot discriminate against me. What if a pharmacist told me I cannot have pain medication because I do not have cancer? Wouldn't this be a big civil rights issue, as cancer pain is no different?
Right. Okay. So that would fall under, in terms of civil rights, if it were an Americans with Disabilities Act case, for example, it would be a denial of treatment. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, a pharmacist can't do that based on your disability. The complicating factor there is that this, arguably, if there are contravailing state laws that say, this is okay for cancer pain, but not for non-cancer pain, that makes it a lot more challenging. Okay. It just does. That becomes a federal versus state question, and it makes for a much more complicated lawsuit.
What about this?
I know these are not satisfying answers. I wish.
No, it's cool. It's what it is. What about federal law 41 USC 1395? It prevents the federal government from interfering with my doctor's practice concerning Medicare and Medicaid.
Right. Well, I think that's a very interesting possibility. And from what I understand, there were actually some physicians in Texas who successfully, doctors, at least one level of court, I think it's probably being appealed, by saying that the government was interfering in the practice of medicine. Mm-hmm. So, there are all kinds of possibilities for how you can bring a case, that is implicated by these facts, and that's one interesting possibility for sure.
How can we help our doctors? When I spoke with Dr. Klein, he mentioned he was covered in Massachusetts by an inexpensive legal plan. Can we help our doctors in trying to get a law firm on retainer for all doctors in the area?
Generally, a law firm's not going to go on retainer for all doctors in the area. I mean, that's not really how they work.
Okay.
He's talking about having legal counsel inexpensively, or an insurance plan. He's probably talking about legal insurance.
Yeah. No, he has right. He has that, but
which is a separate issue, definitely.
Okay. What if we jump started this legal protection plan for doctors, at least for like the initial encounters with the board, and maybe even another group of lawyers for DA hassles? Do you think this might work?
For legal liability insurance, you mean, or
legal protection?
Or
like a legal protection plan?
Well, we're not going to have sort of legal protection for doctors per se, unless they're represented by particular lawyers.
Okay.
And I think what Dr. Klein was talking about was legal liability, which professional liability insurance, which we all have to, if you're a lawyer operating on your own, you also have professional liability insurance. And then the insurance company provides the lawyer for you.
Okay.
But, I mean, there's not I don't know of any networks of lawyers who represent doctors in all cases. But I don't think that exists.
Yeah, because I was just wondering about is there a way that we can protect our doctors? Is there, is there a way to protect the patients in both? And if there's anything else that we can all do. Do you mind if we take a few more calls because our switchboard's kind of lighting up? Okay, caller from area code 808. What's your name and where are you from?
Hi, this is Valerie Hawk from Seattle. Nice to talk to you again, Janelle.
Hi, Valerie.
And hi, Kate. We've messaged on social media before.
Hi, Valerie. Nice to hear your voice. Yeah.
I was actually known called the lawn chair lady in Hawaii. I used to take a lawn chair to all the autism conferences so I could lay down, so I could really relate.
Yeah. You and I, man, we're twin sisters.
To your situation. Yeah, and the whole DC experience, and so I'm trying to gather as many pain patients as we can, and trying to get a louder voice to speak with Congress and our policymakers. I'm looking at your website, and I see you're going to be speaking before a lot of, it looks like, medical societies this year. And I was wondering,
I just spoke to some.
Yeah, is your message about pain or trying to get them to speak up, or?
I did two talks. I just gave a talk at Tulane. It was a conference for primary care physicians, and I did two things. I did one version kind of my TED Talk for them to give them a patient perspective and sort of an overall regulatory perspective, and then I talked to them about how they can operate within the law and still treat patients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just kind of considering wondering what your angle, and any do you have a deadline on your book?
Nope, I'm just working on. I'm at the early stages, so I've got an agent and I'm working on it, but no deadline yet.
All right, good. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. We'd love to. Maybe we can touch base sometime.
Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. I mean, you were talking. I understand you were on the show recently. You're in an interesting state for pain treatment and the history of everything that's happened here. I was talking to Joe about that.
We're at ground zero here.
You are, because PROP sort of came out of, part of it came out of University of Washington, and yet at the same time, it's also where John Benica formed the first pain management center in the world. So it's an interesting state for sure, historically.
Yeah, we get to see those PROP members up close and personal out here, and it's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I bet they're not very sympathetic.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Valerie, for calling in.
Thanks.
Caller from area code 304. What is your name and where are you from?
Hello, this is Les Levinson from West Virginia.
Hi, Les. What's your question?
I really don't have a question. I just want to listen to the speaker. I think she's
gotcha.
doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Just interesting what's going on and keep up with it. There's so many things to work on, as far as laws and stuff and the protection of people. So.
Okay. Well, please feel free to listen in on here. And thank you for calling in, though, and listening in. I wanted to ask you about the lawyers, the 5 lawyers that sued the tobacco companies, and now they're suing the 4 pharma companies and a few doctors. Do you believe that they have a smoking gun in the same way as with what happened with the tobacco company? And maybe you want to explain it a little bit to our audience. I don't know if they'll know.
Yeah, I mean, I do not know a lot of the inner details of the case. With the tobacco company, I mean, there are analogies, and the lawyers are bringing these cases because with tobacco companies, there was a smoking gun. The the heads of the tobacco companies came in front of Congress and said, that cigarettes were not addictive, even though when the lawyers looked into it, they discovered that they were in fact addictive. Mm-hmm. There is a parallel argument being made that the pharmaceutical companies advertised opioids to doctors saying that they were not addictive. Mm-hmm. I don't, number one, I don't know the specifics of what they have found or what they will find in discovery, whether there are actually pharmaceutical companies who said that they were absolutely not addictive. And I certainly don't think there's a smoking gun in terms of OxyContin, which was a huge part of at least the early settlements. OxyContin became a huge problem because people tampered with it. It was an extended release medication, and at the time, it was genuinely believed in the pain management community that treating someone with an extended release medication was better in terms of addiction because you didn't have peaks and valleys in terms of your pain relief, and you weren't sort of constantly taking pills in response to pain, so you weren't sort of wiring the brain that way as a reward response thing, mm-hmm. which is part of what happens with addiction eventually. It's a different kind of reward response calculus. But there was a genuine belief that extended release medications were better for pain. I don't believe that, as far as I know, there's no evidence that the pharmaceutical companies knew that people would smash it so that they could get all of that medication and get a better high. Right. So I don't think there's evidence, in that regard. And the question is, there's a background about, what's allowed in this country. Historically, we have allowed, so sort of 2 points. We have allowed advertising of pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. We have allowed sort of a deregulation between sort of government oversight and partnering with government. That's been happening sort of since Reagan. We've allowed direct marketing through the internet. Those things are all allowed, and companies will do sort of what they can to the fullest, right up to what's prohibited by law. Mm-hmm. So aggressive advertising was permitted. Whether they stepped over the line and actually lied and said these things are absolutely not addictive, something that strong, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the evidence is for that. I don't personally believe that doctors thought that suddenly opioids couldn't be addictive to people just because of that kind of advertising. But the other part of this is that, people have been trying, pharmaceutical companies have been trying to make non-addictive pain medicine forever. For since the beginning of time, really. And they have thought at different times that they were less addictive, that they were successful. And I think there probably was a genuine belief on the part of the companies that there was, mm-hmm. some success in making a less addictive medication for this context. It didn't turn out that way because of sort of how OxyContin was used. But, I understand why they're doing it because, states and local governments have had to put a lot of money into treatment. But
we'll see. It was only a short
the analogy
period.
Holds.
Yeah, because at what point? It was only a short period. Then they put the tamper-proof within OxyContin, and then heroin blew up, and now it's illicit manufactured fentanyl. I'm going to take a really strong stance on something here, and I'm going to put some stuff together, and I want to know what you think about this. So we have states that are bankrupt. We have Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, states like that. Is this what's really going on with the so-called opioid epidemic? Is this why the government and lawmakers aren't doing a whole lot for patients forced off their medications, or for the patients that have committed suicide, or the reason innocent doctors like Dr. Tennant are still being raided by the DA? Are doctors and patients collateral damage? Is this legal homicide? Is this an entire epidemic really just about the money? Is that what this is? I don't think it's just about the money. Okay.
I don't. I definitely think patients and doctors are collateral damage. So I do, and I also think there are beneficiaries to this epidemic. the media get a dramatic story with great ratings every day, right? Mm-hmm. The politicians get to look like they're either tough on crime with all the prosecutions or sympathetic to vulnerable people, with people in addiction, depending on their political persuasion, whether it's the right or the left, without doing a whole lot. So I do think there are people who are benefiting. There may be financial beneficiaries at some level, but I don't think it's all about states trying to dig themselves out of bankruptcy. I definitely don't. I mean, I do actually think there was loose prescribing in the 90s, and I think that, looser prescribing practices, and I think that pills did get into medicine cabinets and they fell into the wrong hands, and that definitely led to some addictions. And certainly the epidemic has evolved over time.
Right. But I mean, like, their main thing is this is about addiction and this is about overdoses. But the reality is the addiction rate really hasn't gone up or down in the last 60 years. I mean, it's stayed the same. I mean, if you have an addictive gene inside of you, then you will be addicted on something. But,
it's true. It's true. But there are also some substances that are more addictive than others. And
mm-hmm.
certain people who have a genetic predisposition for addiction, who have comorbidities with mental illness, who are of a certain age, may, find, an opioid more addictive than other people might. So that's not I don't think we can totally say that opioids are not, potentially harmful or addictive at all. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably overstating it.
Right. Well,
but yes, I think we've got a very simplistic solution to a very complex problem.
Yes.
That's not helping people with addiction much, and it's certainly not helping people in pain.
Mm-hmm.
There are other beneficiaries.
We have a question from YouTube. Levitt asks, can I, as a pain patient, say my civil rights were violated since I was force tapered and have provable pain?
I think you can certainly say that your civil rights were violated if you were force tapered. But right now, there aren't cases out there that will say, a doctor tapering you. I mean, first of all, it would depend on a couple things. Were they in a state where that was actually required? What the circumstances were? Whether the person is still getting care from the physician and was given, other alternatives. I mean, it will depend on a lot of different circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I think if a doctor, has force tapered and is denying treatment, then arguably your civil rights are being violated.
So what are the main legal issues in the pain refugee crisis? What are these issues that are going on right now? How do we start changing things?
Legally, I mean, I do mm-hmm. think, as I said, I don't think we have a lot of areas of easy legal recourse. It's not, part of the problem is access to lawyers, and part of the problem is causes of action. I think there are possibilities like interference with the practice of medicine. I think there are possibilities in terms of medical liability if someone is treated in a way that becomes harmful to them. I think there are possibilities if there's a denial of treatment under the ADA. Although you're not entitled to a specific treatment, courts don't really want to get into the practice of medicine. Courts don't want to get into the practice of medicine either.
Right.
But if there's a clear case that someone's being dropped or denied treatment, that's a possibility. There are a lot of different possibilities. And I do think complaining to, medical licensing boards is not a bad idea. What Adrienne said was correct. In a lot of states, if you provide notice and other doctors, you're probably not going to be censored under your state licensing board. But if you're abandoning someone who is in the middle of withdrawal, that's arguably, abandoning someone in an emergency situation, and that's protected under tort law or sort of medical liability law.
Right. So something else that's going on, too, within the communities online, what do you think about the censorship that is occurring on public social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook? I know you've been shadow banned lately. And
I have, yeah.
Yeah, could you talk about that a little bit?
I could talk about it a little. I'm kind of a Luddite, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big social media wizard at all. So this has caught me a little off guard, and I don't know exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. But shadow banning, from what I understand, is something that happens where a person may continue to tweet, but their tweets don't go out to all of the people who follow them, or only go to a couple people. It sort of limits your reach. But you don't know it. You're just tweeting and you don't know any different. It's just other people can say. I mean, I discovered I was shadow banned when other people said, "Wow, your responses are disappearing." When I look for them on the screen, they're not there.
Okay. So you couldn't see anything. It was just.
So, yeah, that's what I was told, and then I looked up, and there's a program that you can look at, and I have been shadow banned. I mean, from my understanding and talking to tech people, what happened, and I can't get myself out of this. It occurs for two reasons. One, I mean, the algorithms are doing it, I think what's happening is sometimes a lot of people in the chronic pain community will tag like 35 people on a tweet,
or hashtag.
There will be lots of conversation that going back and forth on that same line, so that you're reaching just a huge number of people from a single tweet. And from what I understand, that triggers algorithms. Unfortunately, I'm in that situation. I can't control what other people do, and I'm still on a lot of those tweet chains that people are sort of using. The other thing that I have heard, and again, I'm no expert on this, these are just things that I've heard, is that there is some scrutiny of your hashtags, and if you're using hashtags like opioids, that has become sort of a trigger for algorithms, partly because they're trying to limit people from dealing opioids or marketing opioids through the site.
But is it actually that, do you think, or is it just, trying to get into too much, taking away from our freedoms now, basically, and because like a lot of it is just a normal person, because it's happening on, I've had it happen to me on Facebook too, and you get censored or something like that. So do we, I mean, legally wise, I mean, is this like a, is this going against one of our amendments, or do you think it's okay?
Well, the First Amendment actually only protects government speech. That's kind of a misconception. But so I wouldn't say that. But censorship is problematic, and I mean, I don't know. It depends on who's doing it. Is it a troll? Is it Twitter? Is it someone who's hacked into the system? I don't know enough to know how it's happening.
Right.
To answer that, really.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we know. I mean, with a lot of the stuff that's gone on, even with Facebook, the sort of high-level stuff is still being examined, whether it's, what the problems are, whether it's legal, whether it's not, where it's coming from.
Yeah, well, because you kind of said...
I don't like it, but
right.
I don't really know enough about it to be able to answer legal questions.
No, that's okay. Can you get into your account now, and can you use it?
I can get into my account, but I am still shadow banned in the sense that that my tweets don't go to all of the people who follow me
Has
anymore.
Twitter tried to help you at all, or have you reached out to them?
No, I've tried to get in touch with them, and I haven't gotten any responses.
Oh, that's frustrating. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your book. You said you didn't know when it's going to be coming out. Do you know the name of it?
Probably Intractable: Pain in a Time of Opioid Misuse, but that's just its working title.
Okay.
Referring to intractable pain and the intractability of the situation.
Have you written before, or
I haven't written books before, but I've written articles and I've written, but this will be my first full book.
So what is in the near future for yourself? What are you going to be doing?
Mostly I'm just going to be writing. I have to, writing a book and speaking and doing what little advocacy I can do in situations like this, at least for the next year or so.
Well, and we would love if you would be able to come back on at some point, especially once your book comes out, because I'm sure the audience would love to hear more about that. Was there anything else that you wanted to share, add, or that maybe we missed before we get going here this evening?
The only thing I can say is that I just feel very sympathetic with people who are suffering and struggling, and I wish I had better answers as a lawyer. And as an advocate, I wish I could, give people more of what they need to solve these problems. I really, truly do. I'm doing the best I can, and I think, there are more advocates than people know about, who are doctors and professionals who are becoming increasingly concerned about this issue. But right now, we don't have the stage.
Yeah.
You know, right now, the entire conversation is being dominated in a single direction, and we are working, you know, against a tsunami.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality.
So do you think so obviously there was too much of a pushback. Do you think it's going to correct itself at some point? And
oh, sure.
And
absolutely.
Is anybody talking out there that you work with that has said, you know, it will be soon, or just you don't know?
I don't know when. I don't think it'll be super soon. And the thing that I hate is that I think a lot of people are going to be the collateral damage and suffer in the meantime.
Yeah.
It will absolutely correct itself. That's what we do in this country. We swing from pendulum to pendulum in every political issue. You know, that's just what we do. And, you know, I do believe that it'll come back to center, but I think a lot of people will be hurt in the process.
Yeah. Well, Kate, thank you so much for being our guest this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and I hope you'll come back with us in the near future.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Just a reminder that ConNation will be in D.C., Washington, D.C. next week for the National Pain Patients Advocacy Week. Tuesday is the White Coat Rally. That's between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. at 950 Pennsylvania Avenue. Wednesday, it's between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Myself and other advocates will be speaking at the congressional briefing on chronic pain. C-SPAN will be broadcasting it, so if you can't be there, you can check it out on C-SPAN. And then next Thursday is the March on Washington between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. at the U.S. Capitol Reflecting Pool. If I'm not in meetings with my senators or health reps, I will be doing lives during the day and shows at night. And ConNation, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us. Thank you for the calls, the wonderful chatting on YouTube. I apologize about that. I think you guys are all awesome. I'm Janelle Elgway, and I hope you all have a great night.
You've been listening to Conspiracies Against Wellness with your host, Janelle Elgway. The opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers, and not necessarily those of EXG LLC, its employees, or sponsors. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.